Caesar Augustus, from humble beginnings to Rome's first emperor born on September 23, 63 BC, atop the Palatine Hill in Rome, the man known to history as Caesar Augustus entered the world during the twilight of the Roman Republic. In keeping with Roman tradition, where names often reflected deeds or desired legacies, Caesar Augustus was a title adopted later in life. His birth name was Gaius Octavius, or Octavian, a name by which he was commonly known in his youth and early adulthood. Octavian hailed from the equestrian class, a social stratum below the senatorial aristocracy. His father, also named Gaius Octavius, belonged to the gens Octavia, a family that had gained prominence through generations of military and political service. This upward mobility earned Octavian's father the label novus homo, a new man, signifying a rise to wealth and power despite humble origins. On his mother's side, Octavian's lineage was even more distinguished. His mother, Aetia Balba, was the daughter of Marcus Aetius Balbus, a Roman praetor, and Julia Minor, the sister of Julius Caesar. Thus, Octavian's family connections positioned him within Rome's elite political sphere. Octavian's early years were tumultuous. Rome, then experiencing rapid growth and overcrowding, saw affluent families retreat to countryside estates. The Octavii were no exception. Octavian spent much of his early childhood at the family's ancestral estate in Velletri, 40 kilometers south of Rome. However, tragedy struck in 59 BC when his father passed away, leaving Octavian an orphan at just 4 years old. His mother remarried Lucius Marcius Philippus, a prominent aristocrat who showed little interest in his stepson. As a result, Octavian was primarily raised by his grandmother, Julia. Their close bond shaped him deeply, and when she passed in 51 BC, the 12-year-old Octavian delivered her funeral oration, showcasing early signs of leadership. Rome in crisis. Understanding Octavian's rise requires a grasp of Rome's volatile political climate during the 1st century BC. While Rome's military dominance had reached unprecedented heights, internal strife threatened the Republic's stability. Beginning in the 3rd century BC, Rome expanded aggressively, defeating Carthage in the Punic Wars and securing territories across the Mediterranean, from Spain to Greece. Yet this expansion bred contradictions. The immense power wielded by Roman generals often eclipsed the authority of the Senate, leading to civil wars. In 83 BC, a major conflict erupted between the generals Gaius Marius and Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Sulla emerged victorious and briefly became dictator before restoring the Republic. Yet his resignation only underscored the fragility of Roman governance. Many wondered when another general might seize power permanently, a question that loomed over the Republic as Octavian was born. By the time Octavian was a teenager, Rome's political scene was dominated by the so-called First Triumvirate, an alliance of 3 powerful men: Pompey the Great, Crassus, and Julius Caesar. Pompey, a celebrated general, had expanded Roman territories in the eastern Mediterranean, earning widespread acclaim. Crassus, the wealthiest man in Rome, gained fame by crushing Spartacus' slave rebellion. Meanwhile, Julius Caesar, Octavian's great-uncle, had risen through the political ranks, eventually conquering vast territories in Gaul, modern-day France. This alliance unraveled in the 50s BC. Crassus was killed in 53 BC during a disastrous campaign in Parthia, modern Iraq. Pompey, despite Senate backing, struggled to match Caesar's growing power, as Caesar's military victories in Gaul elevated him to near-mythical status. Tensions culminated in 49 BC when Caesar crossed the Rubicon River with his army, an act of defiance that sparked a civil war. Octavian and Caesar's legacy as Caesar's star rose, so did Octavian's proximity to power, though initially kept from military campaigns by his cautious mother. Octavian eventually joined Caesar in the final years of the Civil War. By the time Caesar triumphed over Pompey's forces and secured control of the Republic, Octavian was poised to learn from one of history's most formidable leaders. Contrary to popular belief, Julius Caesar never became emperor. His title of dictator was a temporary, albeit extended, position granted during crises. However, his accumulation of power made many suspect he intended to rule for life, a suspicion that led to his assassination in 44 BC. It would be Octavian, not Caesar, who later established the imperial system and became Rome's first emperor, ushering in a new era for the ancient world. Octavian's rise after Caesar's assassination in 46 BC, as the remnants of Pompey's supporters faced their final defeat, Octavian made a significant impression on Julius Caesar. Recognizing his potential, Caesar amended his will in late 46 BC or early 45 BC to adopt Octavian and designate him as his principal heir. This practice was common among Roman nobility, particularly for those without legitimate male heirs. While Caesar had an illegitimate son, Caesarion, with Cleopatra in 47 BC, Octavian's adoption secured his status as the primary beneficiary of Caesar's estate and political legacy. This decision would prove critical, though Caesar could not have foreseen its full implications. As Caesar maintained his dictatorial powers after the Civil War, discontent brewed within the Senate. A conspiracy formed to assassinate him, and although Caesar's ally Mark Antony learned of the plot, he was unable to warn him. On the Ides of March 15, 44 BC, Caesar entered the Senate unaware of the danger. Moments later, a group of senators attacked and killed him in a brutal assassination. Contrary to Shakespeare's famous dramatization, Caesar likely did not utter the words "Et tu, Brute" during the attack. Octavian was not in Rome during these events. He was undergoing military training in Illyria, in the region now known as Croatia and Albania. Upon hearing of Caesar's death, the 18-year-old deliberated over his next steps. While later accounts suggest he considered raising an army, this seems improbable given his youth and inexperience. Instead, he returned to Rome, where he discovered that Caesar's will named him as heir to a vast fortune and the political loyalty of many of Caesar's followers. To cement his role as Caesar's political successor, Octavian adopted his great-uncle's name, becoming Gaius Julius Caesar Octavianus, or simply Octavian. This symbolic act galvanized Caesar's supporters, even as the conspirators who killed him sought to restore the Republic. Their efforts were short-lived. Within weeks, Mark Antony's fiery eulogy at Caesar's funeral incited the Roman populace against the assassins, forcing them to flee Rome. In the ensuing chaos, political factions began to vie for power. Octavian's political acumen despite his youth, Octavian demonstrated extraordinary political savvy. He quickly leveraged Caesar's resources, including a war chest of 700 million sesterces that Caesar had intended for a campaign against the Parthian Empire. Octavian appropriated these funds and supplemented them by diverting tributes from Rome's client states in the eastern Mediterranean. Armed with immense wealth, he bribed 2 of Antony's legions to join him and rallied thousands of Caesar's former supporters across Italy. By late 44 BC, Octavian had secured enough influence to be made a senator, an unusual achievement for someone of his age and inexperience. In early 43 BC, he took an even bolder step. After both consuls for the year died in military campaigns, Octavian marched on Rome with his legions and demanded to be appointed consul. With little opposition, the Senate acquiesced, making the 19-year-old the youngest consul in Roman history. The second triumvirate Octavian's rise disrupted the delicate balance of power in Rome. Mark Antony, a prominent general and ally of Caesar, sought to position himself as Caesar's true successor. Meanwhile, Marcus Aemilius Lepidus, another ally of Caesar, commanded significant military resources. To prevent further fragmentation, the 3 men formed a new political alliance, formalized on November 27, 43 BC, with the passage of the Lex Titia. This agreement established the Second Triumvirate, granting Octavian, Antony, and Lepidus official control over the Republic's governance. Unlike the informal First Triumvirate of Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, the Second Triumvirate was a legally sanctioned arrangement with explicit powers. The triumvirs divided control over Roman territories and set their sights on consolidating power. While the Republic's days were numbered, Octavian's ascent marked the beginning of a transformative era in Roman history of the Senate and effectively divided the Republic into three spheres of influence, which the three trium would rule. Octavian was given control over the region corresponding to Tunisia and Libya in North Africa, as well as Sardinia and Corsica. Hispania and southern Gaul were granted to Lepidus, while Mark Antony controlled the Alpine region and most of Gaul. The Senate would control Rome itself and Italy, while much of the Republic's territories in the eastern Mediterranean had fallen into the hands of others such as Brutus and Gaius Cassius Longinus, who had assassinated Caesar. As these lands in the east constituted the richer parts of the empire, whichever of the trium could seize the region would be best placed to emerge victorious amongst the trium. In the years that followed, the first years of the second triumvirate saw Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus acting cordially and in conjunction with each other. Firstly, they began strengthening their position by proscribing former opponents of Caesar's. Proscription was a process whereby Roman citizens were effectively outlawed by the Republic and had their estates confiscated. By proscribing hundreds of wealthy individuals, the three trium came into possession of vast estates and wealth, which they used to reward their followers and strengthen their own factions. Together, the three began the work of crushing those who had assassinated Caesar and who had taken control of much of Rome's territories in the eastern Mediterranean. Octavian and Mark Antony took the lead in this, bringing 28 legions across the Adriatic Sea to Greece. From there they marched north and met with the forces led by Brutus and Cassius near Philippi in Macedonia. The resulting battle involved upwards of 200,000 men. In the clash, casualties were actually relatively limited, and no side was the clear victor in military terms. However, when Cassius was given false information that Brutus's forces had been defeated, he committed suicide, and Brutus did the same when he learned of Cassius's actual fate. Thereafter, their forces surrender. It was a bizarre end to the wars which followed from Caesar's assassination. The power dynamics of the second trium shifted considerably in the aftermath of the victory at Philippi. Lepidus, who had always been the least powerful of the three tribers, was quickly marginalized on the back of a spurious lie invented by Octavian and Mark Antony that he had been secretly providing aid to Caius Pompus, a son of Pompey the Great, who had seized control of Sicily in the aftermath of Caesar's assassination, with Leopardus removed. In this way, Octavian and Mark Antony agreed on a new division of power, whereby Octavian would effectively control the western parts of the Republic, notably Italy, Hispania, and the North African provinces, while Mark Antony would control the eastern provinces such as Greece and Syria, as well as exercising influence over the many client kingdoms in this region, such as to Egypt, which were not formally part of the Roman Republic, but which were effectively vassals, who paid tribute to Rome. Then, to cement the new dispensation, an agreement was reached whereby Antony married Octavian's sister Octavia in October 40 BC. The alliance, as uneasy as it was, would hold for nearly a decade. One of Octavian's most pressing problems following the effective division of the Republic between himself and Antony was the presence of Sextus Pompus in Sicily. Pompus had ensconced himself firmly on the island, which sat right on the shipping routes between the western and eastern Mediterranean, and he had even managed to gain a hold of Sardinia and Corsica, having built up a formidable navy by attacking and seizing shipping passing by the islands from the eastern Mediterranean to Rome. Pompus was able to interfere in the supplies of grain and other foodstuffs to Rome. The Eternal City was heavily reliant on such deliveries from Egypt and other countries to feed its swelling population and provide the famous bread dole to its citizens. Consequently, something needed to be done to remove Pompus from Sicily. Initially, an agreement was brokered in 39 BC, the Pact of Mum, whereby Sextus was acknowledged in his possession of the islands if he would cease attacking Roman shipping. However, once his plundering recommenced after a few months, Octavian determined to act and sent his foremost commander Marcus Agria to crush Caesar, a feat which he eventually accomplished. In 36 BC, Pompus fled to the east, where he was captured on the Greek island of Metis and executed the following year. The conclusion of the war against Pompus in Sicily also led to a further disintegration of the second triumvirate. Lepidus had been sidelined years earlier, but the removal of seas from the Italian islands in 36 BC now saw him trying to re-establish himself. By seizing Sicily, Octavian made clear his dominance of the western Mediterranean in the months that followed by sending his army south, upon which Lepidus, his only legions, defected to Caesar's adopted heir. Octavian had once again shown his belief that gold was the key to loyalty here and had made it known to Lepidus. legions that they would receive generous payments if they relinquished their allegiance to their commander. As a result of their defection, the Third Triumvir was stripped of all his political offices by Octavian other than the largely ceremonial position of Pontifex Maximus or chief priest of Rome, yet Lepidus was allowed to retire peacefully to Cape Circe not far from Rome, and he would live for nearly another quarter of a century once. He agreed to largely stay out of Roman politics, but the immediate consequence of his fall in the mid-30s BC was that there were now definitely only two Triumvirs left, and the showdown between Octavian and Mark Antony loomed ever nearer. While Octavian was enjoying these successes in the West, Antony was experiencing some trouble in the East. In the late 40s BC, Antony had struck up a relationship with Cleopatra, the queen of Ptoic Egypt, who had previously been the lover of Julius Caesar, and had even borne him a son named Caesarion, making his base in Egypt. In the early 30s BC, Antony had determined to strengthen his position relative to Octavian by undertaking further conquests on the eastern borders of the Republic. In particular, he was anxious to rejuvenate Caesar's earlier plans to make war on the Parthian Empire in Mesopotamia. Thus, in 36 BC, he invaded Parthia with a massive force. However, the invasion soon turned to disaster as Antony's main force was separated from the baggage trains of supplies and siege equipment when a mobile force of Parian cavalry intercepted and destroyed much of the latter. The Roman general was forced to retreat back towards Roman territory in Syria, losing further men along the way as his forces were harried by the Patans. The campaign had turned into a disaster, the embarrassment of which was only partially remedied by his conquest of the Kingdom of Armenia in 34 BC and the installation of his son Alexander Helios as its king. This was the context in which Octavian made his major grab for total power over the Republic. Antony's absence from the Eternal City, his relationship with Cleopatra, and seeming preference for the Egyptian capital of Alexandria over Rome, and the nepotism he showed towards his followers in the East all provided ammunition for Octavian and his faction to begin claiming that Antony wished to seize power in the Republic and begin building a new realm of which Egypt and the city of Alexandria would be the heartland. Octavian was particularly bullish in claiming this as he was angered by Antony's embarrassing of his sister Octavia, to whom Antony was still married through his very public relationship with Cleopatra. Moreover, Octavian was actually able to substantiate his claims that Antony was Orientalizing. In 32 BC, he entered the